It was once a ritual practiced only by holy men, but is now a global lifestyle choice and a multi-billion-dollar industry.
Yoga has been able to mold itself in many, many different ways. And I think that's why yoga has also become very popular.
But has yoga transcended all boundaries of geographical and religious ownership?
These are yoga exercises demonstrated at a meeting in New Delhi. What's yoga? Well, my dictionary says it consists of the withdrawal of the senses from external objects.
Yoga is mentioned in our scriptures. The word asan is mentioned. There are certain texts, the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, the Grahan Samhita, which talks about specific postures as well. So we know that yoga has been around for a while.
For some, yoga's origins are often the subject of heated debate. Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains all lay claim to some techniques, while others argue that it had no religious links to begin with. In its modern form, it is mostly performed as exercise, but for thousands of years, it was primarily a spiritual pursuit of enlightenment and freedom from suffering.
I do believe that yoga is a sacred practice, and if you begin yoga with any sort of a prayer, even if it's an affirmation, it can really transform the practice.
Scholars including Jan Diansky argue there was known in practice in the Indus Valley civilization in as early as the 3rd millennium BCE based on the posture of figures found on seals. But others refute this theory, like researchers Mark Singleton and James Mallison, who point out that similar images were also found in Mesoamerica, the historical and cultural area in North and Central America, up to 2 centuries earlier and have no such significance.
Wait, what?
They trace the practice to 500 BCE, coinciding with the emergence of Buddhism. Their book, Roots of Yoga, argues that religion helped spread it to modern-day Sri Lanka and Tibet. They find that the ancient Hindu texts, the Vedas, described important elements of the discipline like posture, controlled breathing, and mysticism.
Just breathe, alright?
But they argue that several religious traditions contributed to the practice as we know it today. Still, its name meaning union in Sanskrit was first mentioned in the Vedas, which are commonly considered the original source by practitioners of the art. The Yoga Sutras were the first texts dedicated exclusively to yoga philosophy. They were compiled by several authors, including sage Patanjali between the 1st century BCE and 4th century CE. Towards the end of the 10th century, a physical phase of yoga based on Tantra emerged, involving exercises, and was later called Hatha Yoga.
Some say the British came and they didn't want Indians to become too strong, so they kind of they made Hatha Yoga into something a little negative. And so for a while, Hatha Yoga was thought of as a sort of an inferior form of yoga versus the other forms of yoga, so not really propagated. Then a lot of masters, in fact, Swami Shivananda was one of the early saints really, who his students spread yoga in India and around the world, because Swami Shivananda was a medical doctor. And when being a medical, this isn't around the 1800s that we're talking about here. And being a medical doctor, he understood that Hatha Yoga was solving a lot of physical problems, and these Hatha Yoga practice could greatly help people with other forms of yoga, because if people don't have physical health, then it's difficult to do any sort of sadhana. So I do believe that Swami Shivananda, with his emphasis on a physical Hatha Yoga practice, really spread yoga in its current form.
As various strands of yoga evolved, reformers such as Swami Vivekananda or Dayanand Saraswati began putting together Raja Yoga. The text merged various philosophies into one focused on God. By the 20th century, yoga was practiced in the mainstream. Since then, it has come to be defined by its postures, especially in the West, where it has boomed overwhelmingly among women.
Remember, this is the early 2000s, and a lot of hype around yoga in the West, a lot of celebrities practicing. A lot of yoga was quite something which was quite interesting, and I remember being pretty surprised by all of this. I remember even trying to walk into a yoga studio and I couldn't go because it was too expensive. So I said, wow, what is this?
But experienced yogis continue to stress that the physical sequences are still intended to ultimately benefit the mind. These moves are not necessarily faithful to the original philosophy.
And today here, as India leads 191 countries in celebrating the first ever International Yoga Day, a 1400-meter stretch on Rajpath with more than 35,000 people gathered here to do yoga.
In 2015, the United Nations accepted Prime Minister Narendra Modi's proposal to implement an International Yoga Day annually on 21st June in an effort to reconnect yoga to its origins. Its celebrations include all kinds of yoga, from the steadiness and stillness of ascetics practiced thousands of years ago to the rigorous physical adaptations of modern day.